let us continue our discussion and let us talk about constraints in this video. So what we mean by constraint? Like if we are following any relational model, we need to follow some constraints. Like we need to have some restrictions. We cannot go and do randomly anything, whatever we want. So there are some constraints. Let us discuss them one by one in this video. But before we go into the technicalities, let us take this example. Consider a student table, and then I am having some details like roll number, then I have name and some contact. Now you'll be having details of students inside this field, right? Now you'll be having roll number 1, 2, 3, then some name, then some contacts. Now what if I come today and say you that hey, my request is I want to insert a data, insert one more row in this table which has roll number as Z, then name as 1, 2, 3, and contact as hash. So is this a valid request? Is this a valid request? No, right? Because it is not possible for a roll number to be Z. Like roll number cannot be a character. The name itself says it is a roll number, it is a number, it needs to be numeric. We cannot keep it as a character. So we want to ignore these kind of requests. Like we want our database to not accept this and not enter this into our table, right? So this is not a valid request, so we need to discard it. So now how do we ensure that this is discarded? We ensure it using some constraints. We keep some constraints on our database, and then it ensures that there is no such invalid request made. Now the constraints which are related with the CRUD operations, so that the DB remains consistent, like database remains consistent, we call them as integrity constraints, right? Integrity constraints. Now there are two types of integrity constraints. One is related to domain, like some domain integrity constraints, and one is related to entity. Okay, so what do you mean by domain related integrity constraints? Now all the values, like, okay, so we said that there are two types of constraints for integrity. Like one is related to domain and the other one is related to entity. Now, what do you mean by domain constraints, domain integrity constraints? Like in this, I particularly say that for any given attribute, we will be defining the data type. Like we'll be defining a roll number as numeric. We can define name as name to have some characters, right? So if we are defining like data type for each of the attribute, this case would not come, right? This case cannot enter in our database, so that our database cannot be corrupted. So this is known as domain integrity constraint. And what about entity? Can an entity have primary key as its primary key as null? No, right? We discussed that our primary key cannot be null, but how do we ensure that? We ensure that using entity integrity constraints, where it says that your primary key cannot be equal to null, right? So this is for the integrity constraints. Now let us move ahead and talk more about further constraints. Let us talk about the second one, which is referential constraints. Now where does this come into picture? Now if you are relating two tables with each other, you need to follow these referential constraints, right? Let us take our old example. Like we have some student table. In that student table, you have roll number, name, and let's say marks. In our professors, like courses table, let's say course table, you have course ID, course name, and name of instructor. Now let's talk about a scenario. Like if you are having an entry, can an entry have some course? Like if you are studying in an engineering college, can you take admission in a medical course? No, right? So you cannot have any course which is not there in the course table as your foreign key if you are a student. Like if I am keeping any entry in the student table and I am relating it with the course table, I cannot have the foreign key as an invalid number. That foreign key must exist in the course table, right? So the first constraint is of insert. Like whenever if you insert any key, the foreign key needs to be valid, it needs to be present in the parent table. So let me write it like value cannot be inserted in child table if it is not there in parent table. I think we are clear with the insert constraint. Now comes the very challenging, very tricky constraint, which is of delete. Like, okay, now you followed the insert constraint. Now, what if you have some courses like you have 3 students which are enrolled in DBMS course. Now, what if you come someday and you delete that DBMS course entry, like that particular row of DBMS course from this course table? What will happen? Can like is it possible that some students are having that course as their course ID in the student table? No, right? You cannot delete a entry from parent table if it is related with some entries in children table. So this is what delete constraint says. Like let me list down. Like let us see what the statement says. A value cannot be deleted from parent table if it is lying in child table. So if the value is there in child table, you cannot delete it. Now comes a very tricky question. Let's analyze this scenario. Like, can you delete a value from a parent table if it is having a relationship with child table of and you're not violating the delete constraint? Okay, it is confusing. Let us list down things. Like you want to delete from parent table uh, and then that value is they associated with child table, like the child table is having a relationship with that value and you also need to follow the constraint. So is it possible? So what does the delete constraint says? It is not possible, right? But there is a way by which you can make it possible. There is something known as on delete constraint. Like what is this on delete? Something is like this. Delete cascade. Now what happens is if you have this particular thing, if you delete an entry from parent table, if you delete it from here, automatically all the entries where this child was referring to this particular parent, they'll be deleted. And one more thing is there, which is on delete null, where all the entries having this particular parent as their reference will be referring to null value as their parent key, right? So there is something known as, okay, so we're clear with the two things. If you have on delete cascade, if you delete an entry from parent table, all the entries referring to that particular entry from the child table will be deleted. And there is something known as on delete null. Like if I remove DBMS course from my course table, all the students enrolled in DBMS course will have null as their course ID. Like in their course ID column, we will be having null. So yeah, these are the two things. These are the two cases when you need to pay attention. Uh, let us move ahead and let us talk about. Okay, so we spoke about integrity constraints. We spoke about uh, the next one, which referencing constraint. So the third constraint type, which is key constraints. Now, what are key constraints? Like for a particular key, like we discussed it here, right? For a particular key, we need to have some constraint, like roll number should be numeric, roll number should be unique, it cannot be null, each student should have some other roll number. So there needs to be some constraints for each of the key. So let us discuss all the key constraints which we have in relational model. So the first key constraint is which we talk about is let's talk about primary key. What are the things we need to have in primary key? If we are declaring any primary key for a database, for a table, for a relation, we should have that particular key as not null. We like, you cannot have a key if it is a null key. How will you uniquely identify it? So that particular key should not be null, that attribute should not be null, right? Then it should be unique. The name suggests you need to uniquely identify, so it needs to be unique, right? So yeah, primary key should be unique. Then what else do we need to have in primary key? Is it possible that a database has multiple primary keys? No, right? uh, there should be only one primary key in a database, right? So only one primary key in a data there should be only one primary key in a table. Let's move ahead and let's talk about constraints. Like, what is a not null constraint? Not null means no value from that particular attribute should be null. Like, value cannot be null. Now, where do we need this? Like, can a student have null name? It is but obvious that everyone who is alive has some name. So it is necessary to keep this constraint so that there is no invalid entry which comes inside. So it is possible that some people may not have middle name, like they can have first name and last name. So you can have null values in the section of middle name. But is it possible that some people are not having first name? No, right? So first name is something, an example of not null. Is it possible that a student has null roll number? No, right? So to ensure that some or the other value is there, we keep this constraint of not null. So how do we represent this constraint? Like, okay. So one more thing is, if what happens in default, like if you are not mentioning anything, by default, if you are not mentioning this constraint, by default null is allowed, unless you do not mention that it is a primary key. If nothing is mentioned, then we by defaultly allow this particular thing. Null value is allowed. So how do we represent this not null constraint? Like when you create table, let's write a query. Like we'll be talking about how to write query in the next video, but let us first have an idea. Like if we say create table, like create table student, this is how we write a query to create table student. Then I'm writing id. I want id to be integer and it should not be null, not null. Then I want name. I want name to be varchar. Like this is a data type. Let us talk in detail in the next video. Then I want maximum length to be 50. I don't want it to go beyond 50. And then it should not be null. Null name should be there, right? Everyone has a name. Then I want, what else did we discuss? Like I can have marks in, and there's no need to have a not null constraint because it may so happen that a student has not given an exam, right? Then I want unique, like I want roll number to be unique, so I'll say unique id. Okay, so this is how we have defined this particular student table. Now note that we have used not null constraint here, like here also we have used. Okay, so I think we're clear with the not null constraint. Let us talk about the new constraint which we introduced here, which is unique. So what do we mean by unique? This is our third constraint. Name suggests There should not be no duplicacy. All values should be distinct. And yeah, that's it. Like for a primary key, you need to have this, right? No duplicate value should be there, all distinct values. That is what this constraint says. Now let's move ahead and let's talk about our next, which is default. Now, if you like, if while creating this table here, if I say that let us keep marks as 0 for default, like if a person has missed the exam, instead of giving null marks to them, let us allocate 0 marks. Like it's their fault they didn't come to the exam, so we'll be giving 0 marks to them. So how do we do that? If marks is not there, what do we do? Like create table student. Now, if you're creating student table, we'll be having like it's not curly bracket. Then we'll be having in ID integer, not null, whatever the constraints were there. Then name LKR50, and while writing marks, I'll say marks int default 0. So this is how we write a query to create table. Now that I have kept some default value, if first particular student is absent on that test, or the marks is not there, then that person will get 0 marks. That's it. So let's move ahead and talk about our next constraint, which is foreign key. Last constraint. Now what happens in foreign key is, we discussed foreign key should be primary key of some other table. Key of other table. What else needs to be there for this foreign key? Like foreign key, can it be null? No, right? Not null. It should be valid, like it should be there in the other table. So yeah, these are the constraints for foreign key. So we have discussed all the constraints. We discussed about integrity constraints, uh, then like okay, so we discussed about integrity constraints, we discussed about referential constraint, then about key constraints. So this is it for constraints. In the next video, let us try and map our banking model to the relational model.